good evening, everyone. Welcome to Artisphere. Here tonight for the next hour, we expect that we're going to have a very spirited and informative discussion about the new terror threat, ISIL, and what the U.S. is doing about it.
Absolutely. And we are joined now by our senior political reporter, Scott Thuman. He will be with us tonight here in our social media center, getting your questions, your thoughts, anything you may want to contribute tonight to this town hall. And we invite you to use the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture.
All right, Scott, with that now, why don't you lay out for us the news of the day?
Well, it's been a very busy 24 hours. Essentially what we have seen, according to CENTCOM and the Pentagon, is 14 airstrikes were conducted by coalition forces. In those airstrikes, we saw 19 targets that were hit, 2 of them considered to be command posts and valuable to ISIL's stronghold, mostly in the area of Kobani. Now, that's a name you're going to hear a lot over the next hour. Kobani is considered to be a strategic town on the border with Turkey. Why is that important? Because if Turkey feels that the threat is crossing the border into that country, perhaps they would be more motivated, or at least this administration hopes so, to possibly put ground forces in play. The argument over whether or not the U.S. will conduct ground force attacks here has already been taken off the table by this administration. They hope Turkey will be the answer for that. So we will chime in on that. We want to hear from you. As Allison mentioned, the hashtag #YourVoiceIsYourFuture. Feel free to reach out to us throughout the program. And with that said, Leon, let's head it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Scott. Now, what we've learned this week is that this operation there in that theater now has been given a name this week. We understand now that it's being called Operation Inherent Resolve. Now, after what we have seen now so far, 3.5 months now of bombing, I would like to know from the panel, first of all, just to get a baseline here, measurement here, from what we have seen and heard over the past 3.5 months, how many of you have confidence that there is a policy and a strategy in place that is going to result in a victory against ISIL? Show of hands. So it's unanimous.
What is unanimous?
The question is, I want to see whether or not you all think that there's a policy and a strategy in place right now that is going to address ISIL in a significant and successful way. We have one. How about this? Let me turn to the audience. We saw what the numbers are here on the stage. Show of hands here in the audience. How many of you are confident that there is a policy or a strategy in place right now that is going to somehow end up in a successful result here in addressing the issue of stopping ISIS? Show of hands. And about the same kind of numbers up here in the audience as well. That's pretty depressing. But there's got to be a reason why people feel that way. This bombing has been going on, as we said, for 3.5 months now. Let me get a sense from each of you, and I want to again stress that we want to keep this. We've got a lot of people here who've got a lot of viewpoints. We want to try to see if we can squeeze in as much information as we can. I want each of you to give me right now, in 30 seconds or less, your take on where we stand after this 3.5-month-long bombing campaign. How would you assess the threat that ISIL now represents, both over there and here at home? I want to start with you, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Well, it's not lost on us that there may be as many as 100 people with American passports in the Mideast fighting for or trying to become fighters for ISIL. On the other hand, ISIL is a group of very organized fanatics. They went into Syria when it was a virtually collapsed state. They have their priorities on straight, and their priorities are to take over the Middle East, not to come into the United States.
Colonel Schaefer, let's start here with you on this end.
Well, the operation ought to be called Incoherent Resolve, not any sort of actual operation. Any operation you actually have has to have a backbone which actually sets out specific strategic objectives you want to achieve. We have none at this point in time. Is ISIS a real threat? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And I would argue we do have to be worried here, because the next step that they're now threatening is suicide bombings here. So if we don't take care of it there, we have to actually start thinking about what we're going to do here to defend our own equities. And let me be clear on this. The whole air campaign right now is a joke. 14 sorties over 24 hours should be 14 sorties every 15 minutes if we're going to win this. We are not committed to winning this in any sort of fashion that I'm aware of militarily. With that said, we also have ISIS being an effective media organization. They've actually gone where al-Qaeda wanted to go and it could never make it. Anwar al-Awlaki set the stage for this. They've mastered it. Everything they do has some level of theater to it. So we really do have to take them seriously. And the other thing that we should mention here is that the Ba'ath Party Saddam Hussein's old Ba'ath Party is helping them. They have elements of that, which makes them militarily effective as well as someone I think that can actually run a country if they put their mind to it. So we have to take it seriously. We haven't yet to date.
Colonel McGregor, would you care to add your thoughts to that?
ISIL presents no significant threat to the United States that secure borders and effective internal policing cannot defeat. So it's no threat to us. ISIL is really the vanguard of a Sunni Islamist assault to eject Iranian power and influence from the Middle East, particularly Iran's allies in Damascus and Baghdad. That's their principal focus. And to some extent, they threaten some of the Sunni kingdoms, emirates in the Arabian Peninsula, where the rulers do not rule strongly or effectively, and corruption is a problem. But their principal enemy is Shia Islam.
Zainab, how about your thoughts?
I think that we definitely cannot discount the threat that ISIS poses. I think the fact that they have been successful in recruiting individuals to their ranks from both the United States and from European countries, I think it's important that we take this threat seriously. The fact that they are expanding, they're gaining ground in Iraq, that they've approached Baghdad, they've approached the border with Turkey. I think it's important for us to realize that they do pose a credible threat. And the result of this is that we have to make sure that whatever strategy we employ in eradicating ISIS takes into account the fact that we have to be able to combat the very sophisticated propaganda that they've been able to use to recruit individuals to join their ranks.
And see, that's a recurring theme, this recruitment and what they're doing online to do that. Chairman Steele.
Yeah, I think they are a clear and at present danger. There's no doubt about that. The beheadings, not just of American and British citizens, French citizens, but also of other Muslims and others that they happen to capture. That tells me that, as a baseline, there's a problem here. That they have a level of fearlessness that we should be concerned about. That their philosophy, whether it's religious-based or just some other way based, just the way they think about the world, is a devaluing of life, a centralized purpose and goal that is using effectively military sources, that is using propaganda very well. That to me says that this is a different kind of enemy. This is not Al-Qaeda. This is not Saddam Hussein. This isn't even Osama bin Laden. This is a very different political / military and terrorist threat that we have not witnessed before, which means that on our end, we have to be up to the task. We have to look at both our interests there and here at the homeland. We have to be prepared to secure our interests there and here. And that, in my estimation, involves something that both the Bush administration as well as the Obama administration has been woeful at, and that is building the intelligence, the human intelligence on the ground to understand this enemy in whatever form it happens to manifest itself. And it starts with understanding the people and where what's really motivating them.
Yeah, we'll get into that, I'm hoping to, coming down the road. Fahim?
First thing, I think it's important to know what is ISIS. To me, the collateral damage of 2003 is the ISIS of 2013. That is the first step. We need to remember that as heinous, as barbaric they are, we need to remember that it is the collateral damage, the innocent civilians lost in a useless war that created this monster in part. Why is that relevant? Because today, again, we are talking of military action. ISIS in itself is 30,000 people. They can't even fill a stadium. We can get rid of them like this. It's the idea of ISIS. It's the ideology that we went after 10 years ago, and I believe we lost because we went fighting Al-Qaeda at the shores of Arabian Sea, today only to find them at the shores of Mediterranean Sea. So the reality is we're losing the war of ideology. We need to fight the ideology of ISIS. How do you do that? You replace it with a better idea. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community believes that this heinous crime against humanity, this version of Islam has to be replaced with a better version of Islam.
All right, thank you for that. We'll get into that some more. Omri.
ISIS is really one of two extremist strands right now. We've heard correctly that it is the vanguard of the Sunni extremist strand that is sweeping parts of the region and is at the threshold, or rather is at war with several representatives of a different extremist strand, which is the Shia strand, which is anchored by Iran. And sometimes those two strands end up fighting, but more of the time they end up cooperating to push out the moderates. And what we've seen in places like Syria specifically is cooperation between Iranian-funded, Iranian-anchored, Iranian-supported elements, specifically the Assad regime, of course, cooperating with the ISIL-style extremists to really eradicate the moderates who might build a better future for everybody in the region. And I think that the other panelists are right, whether they minimize the threat in one direction, they say ISIL just can't do much, or that ISIL can be easily dealt with. I think they're fundamentally right. The real threat to the region is that the mischief that Iran is sowing across the region allows Sunni extremism as the only other alternative to take hold.
All right, well, let's go right now to our audience. We've got some people here who have some questions. Allison?
Leon, I have Musa Assad here. Where are you from?
I'm from the Howard County region.
Okay, what is your question tonight?
So my question, good evening to the esteemed panelists. This is really a question to everyone, is to flesh out a little bit more this question of really what is the new threat in our daily lives? Is it clear and imminent danger? What are we really afraid of here? And I draw your attention to things that usually aren't covered in the media. Last month, earlier this month actually, over 2 million Muslims around the world carried out a pilgrimage to Mecca called Hajj that everyone knows, but it's not covered. On 9/11 at Capitol Hill, actually, there was a Muslims for Life blood drive campaign to save lives, and many others all across the nation been going on for years, saving over hundreds of thousands of lives. And then on the other hand, you look at leading causes of death here in the U.S. CDC reports, for example, has now in the top 10 almost 40,000 suicides. Yep. A gentleman talked earlier about suicide bombers. 40,000 American citizens killing themselves. So open up for discussion on the panel. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Anybody have any thoughts?
I think that's a brilliant question. On one end, we say, where are the moderate Muslims? On the other end, they're everywhere. I believe Islam is moderate. There is, in fact, extremist Islam is an oxymoron. But where is the media? My question is not that where are the moderate Muslims? Where are thought leaders? Where are policy leaders? Where are government leaders? Where is the media when the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, just to give you one example, raises 10,000 units of blood every September to commemorate 9/11? Where is the media?
See, Colonel?
I'd like to go back and to the man's fundamental question, which I think also is, what's the military threat? There is none. The last time we had a serious military threat to the United States, there were Soviet nuclear missile submarines patrolling off our coast, carrying theater ballistic missiles that could kill hundreds of thousands of Americans in the space of a few minutes. There's nothing like that. And the 30,000 men who are primarily mounted in pickup trucks, they have captured some other equipment, but based on my own personal experience in the Middle East, I can tell you the likelihood of that equipment that they've captured running for very long without repair parts and people who are technically qualified to maintain them is low. So I don't see a major threat there. What we're witnessing in the region is something that we have definitely, as my colleague suggested earlier, helped to create, but it's not ours. It's not a war about us. It's about the Sunni and the Shia and the various actors in the region who are now positioning themselves for dominance there. We don't need to participate in this particular scrimmage.
But Colonel, if I may, one of the things that we keep hearing about is their outreach online. And we've had a case here, at least one in this country, a situation in Oklahoma, where a person who said that they were emulating what they had heard from ISIS online beheaded a woman at a plant in Oklahoma. That sort of thing is the kind of thing that plants in people's minds that there is a threat to the United States. There is a threat here.
Well, if I could hit that real quick. Doug and I will disagree on certain points of this. Doug is absolutely correct. Right now, there is no clear military reason for us to do what we're doing. There is not. We're basically kind of just churning the chaos with what little we're doing. Either you're in it to win it, or you need to not be there at all, because it just is going to bring them here. And that's the point.
Well, there's nothing to win,
well,
in my judgment.
I'm not disagreeing
exactly
with you.
Right.
What I'm saying, though, is that because we are now churning, we are now made ourselves a target again, you have the online recruitment. I've actually watched some of these videos of these individuals, Canadians as a matter of fact, who have talked about the fact that they're proud of the fact that they're getting trained to come and do martyrdom operations, which is the word for suicide bombing. So within the context of the fact we've involved ourselves, we have to be vigilant of the fact that people are going to come here to do something. There's ways of ratcheting down the chaos, but it may require that we allow the Iraqi nation to dissolve into 3 different countries, into Sunni, Shia, and Kurd, because to put the force in there, to pull it all back together, would require another invasion of
Wait a
science.
minute, you said we allow? We allow? Who are we to determine anything in the region? This is insane. This is a supposition that somehow or another we can manipulate these people and create some sort of outcome that favors us. Haven't we learned that's an impossibility?
But I think
it's important to also make sure that we allow the Iraqi people to also govern themselves. Part of the problem that led to the formation of ISIS is the fact that there was a government in control, a regime who actually helped to create sectarian strife. And part of the United States' role in helping to cultivate a more peaceful democratic society in that part of the world is to make sure that there's a government in place that is uniform in the way that it treats the different sects within Iraq. Whether it's our place to say that it's okay to create 3 separate entities within Iraq, I don't think that that's the United States' role. I think that we should focus on issues that affect Americans here at home.
It's a very weird definition of American interests that would limit those interests only to attacks on the homeland. Smart diplomacy, it would seem, would include assisting our allies in protecting themselves in the region. Now, they are thinning, and they are under assault, and they are under siege. But to say that we don't have interests in the region, or that we don't have, with due respect, a reason to be there to protect our traditional pragmatic Arab allies in the Gulf, it seems strained.
But what
I think
happened
it's
to
very
liberty
important
justice
to also
for all?
recognize
You know, when
the
you
fact
talk
that in the past, since 1980, we have targeted military campaigns. We've either occupied or invaded or bombed 14 countries within the Middle East. And if we think about how that's manifested, how that's benefited American interests, either whether in the region, abroad, or whether here at home, it's taken an enormous toll on our economy, on the image of Americans abroad. Really, we have to think about before we wage these kind of military campaigns.
That's why you see the president. It's interesting that for all the divisions in the Congress, no one is contradicting the notion that there should be no boots on the ground. The reason that, I mean, we tried that. It was, of all the wars this country has ever fought, this was the biggest mistake. I do agree we have interests in the region. The question is, what role do we have? It seems to me, yes, the bombing is not enough, but nobody comes up. Nobody has the nerve to say, therefore, put boots on the ground. I want to know where the people in the region are on the ground. I mean, it is our job to do what they cannot do for themselves. And I don't think they can do the bombings. But
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it comes back to why can they not do the bombings? And I think it's important to also look back at the factors that allowed groups like ISIS to take form. And the fact that there was military intervention, the fabricated weapons of mass destruction that helped create instability in the region, that destabilized the country, that claimed millions of Iraqi lives, that created refugees all across the region.
So you think nothing should be done then?
No, I'm not saying that nothing should be done.
If I may, I'd like to dovetail, or just to jump on that, because one of the things that I've heard a number of times about the reason why there are no other Muslim boots on the ground in countries that don't want to put their boots on the ground is that because no Muslim nation wants to be seen as the one that prevented the caliphate that was predicted or called for in the Quran to be formed. Is that true?
Look, I will defer to those who are more familiar with the theology, but let's be frank. The Turks have no interest in destroying ISIS because ISIS is destroying enemies of the Turks. Mm-hmm. The Turkish president is a Sunni Islamist. He is cooperating with the Saudis. The Saudis now regard ISIL with a certain degree of fear, but they and the Turks and the Qataris and other Sunni Islamists in the region have contributed the money, the supplies, and helped the recruits to reach this. On the other side, you have the Shiites. You have Iran. You have the Assad. You have the Baghdad Shiite Arab rump state in southern Iraq. They are allied, and by the way, they are in coalition with Russia against the Sunnis. Now, the issue that I have is, first of all, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, together have thousands of aircraft, thousands of tanks, hundreds of thousands of troops. The Turkish army is the largest in NATO. It's far larger than the United States Army. They have no interest in destroying ISIL. So under the circumstances, why are we so terribly interested in destroying something that the states in the region themselves are not interested in fighting?
So you're saying then that there's no option, there's no way to
one
bring
of the things
we've got a coalition of 60 countries. You're saying that it's not a real coalition.
Come on, I've been down that road. I went down that road during the Kosovo Air Campaign. I saw it in Haiti. I've seen it over and over again. You know, we recruit states to confer legitimacy on us. We promise their army free boots. You know, I mean, this kind of nonsense. Forget it. The coalition's meaningless.
I think there's some value in the proposition that, you know, the U.S. has a role, and I think the Congresswoman is exactly right. The question is, how do we define that role in a post-9/11 environment? The idea of nation building is something I think most Americans in large measure have turned away from. That concept is not in our national interest. Because of the consequences, the ramifications, and especially the cost. But there is also, in this particular instance, and you've touched on it, the fact that as much as everyone's talking about what the U.S. needs to do, what the U.S. must do, trust me, the folks over there are happy to see the U.S. doing whatever the U.S. is doing, because it furthers what limited interest they have at that moment. It keeps them off the firing line. Certain nations do not want to be seen engaging militarily against another Muslim nation. There are all these other aspects of this that we have allowed ourselves to get caught up into. And instead of being the parent, if you will, and stepping back and saying, look, you guys, you work this out and let me know how this works itself out, we step in and we break up a fight where ostensibly there is no fight, and arguably create one. And so I think that we've got to look at this a little bit from distance as opposed to rushing in as we have, as you've noted in the past.
Well, I've got to step in right now because we have someone online right now. Scott, what are you seeing over there?
Yeah, there are a couple things social media-wise that we want to get to. One, though, is in regards to social media that's being used by ISIL. Look, we just saw the 5th edition now of the English translated magazine that they are using effectively to reach out to people in the West. We know that while Twitter often takes down feeds pretty quickly, ISIL's had a little more success with Facebook, certainly with YouTube, and people wonder what influence it's having on Westerners who may be convincible, for lack of a better word, and so we should talk about that. And secondly, at Wax Eloquent just tweeted us saying, what is the most effective organized group of Muslims to supplant the spiritual foundation of ISIL? Deep question there.
Interesting.
I'd like to comment on that. So my organization, the Council on American Islamic Relations, has really been at the forefront of making sure that not just American Muslims, but also Muslims globally, and also the public, general public, is aware of the fact that even though ISIL, this group, claims to represent the ideals of Islam, it in no way, shape, or form represents the true tenets of Islam. And we've not only issued numerous condemnations calling out their actions and the brutal, barbaric, horrific acts that they've been engaged in, but we've also published a letter that's been signed by almost 130 Muslim scholars and leaders worldwide. And it's a step-by-step letter that points out 24 key points of how the actions of this barbaric group in no way, shape, or form reflect the ideals of Islam. Right. And this is something that we've been using, we've been publicizing to raise awareness to susceptible youth who might otherwise be frustrated about what's going on in the region, who might otherwise be more susceptible or vulnerable to becoming recruited, to help raise awareness that this is not a legitimate organization that's going to help.
All right, let's get to another question we have here in the audience. Allison?
Okay, Leon, I have Stuart Rosenblatt here from Loudoun County, and I understand, Stuart, you have a legislative question tonight.
Yes, I do. My question pertains to a bill that's in the U.S. Congress gathering a lot of support. It's for the whole panel, especially Mr. Schaefer, Mr. Steele, and the Congresswoman. It's HRES 428, introduced by Walter Jones. Steve Lynch now has Lacey Clay, Steve Stockman, Ted Yoho, and Charlie Rangel, and a completely wild variety to declassify the original chapter of the 9/11 report that purports to show that Saudi Arabia was directly responsible for orchestrating and funding the attacks on the Pentagon, the Twin Towers, etc. According to Senator Bob Graham, who chaired and wrote the report and is demanding that it be declassified, there's a direct connection between ISIL today and Saudi Arabia funding and orchestrating them. My question is very simple. Would you support the declassification? And it's been supported now by the chairs of the 9/11 Commission, numerous top people.
All right, let's let them answer that then.
Well, full disclosure, I work with Walter Jones on that, so I'm clearly for it. And I agree with your assessment regarding the Saudis. The Saudis have been behind the scenes on doing a lot of things, and this may get me in trouble, maybe not. Joe Biden was completely correct when he talked about certain allies funding both sides of this. And the Saudis have been one of those groups, not necessarily the government, but members of the royal family have chipped in and actually done this. So a lot of the things we actually fight militarily have been funded by the very allies we're trying to support. So this is something I agree with Walter on. He's a dear friend. That we need to get clarification on exactly who we're dealing with, how we're dealing with them. So, Michael,
no, I'd absolutely agree. I think a lot of the confusion, frustration, and anger that we've seen among the American people and even among some of our allies from time to time emanates from the fact that what we don't know, and that we do tend to hide behind, non-disclosure, secret information, and all this. At this point in time, to put it in context and perspective, I think it would be an important move to help bring closure to some extent on 9/11, but then to help us better understand what we're dealing with right now, because we don't.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with both of my colleagues here. But I can't even imagine why, 12, 13 years after 9/11, why this would still be classified in the first place. Secondly, I'm all for exposing the Saudis. I think this double, triple role that they play, yes, they're an ally of the United States, but everybody needs to know who they really are. If they did know who they really are, that could bring some pressure on them, especially as they now, of course, are allegedly funding ISIS and everybody else that's bad.